I'm Phil Gale. Welcome to The Day. We begin with Donald Trump's decision to extend the ceasefire with Iran indefinitely, despite the breakdown in efforts to restart negotiations. A second round of talks that had been inspected in Pakistan is now on hold after Iran signalled it would not attend, while a US blockade of its ports remains in place, and the White House kept its team at home. But the US blockade of Iranian ports continues, and Iran's Revolutionary Guard has carried out multiple attacks on commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz and seized several ships. So while the ceasefire is technically still in place, the reality is much more volatile. And for many Iranians, Washington's mixed signals and uncertainty about what comes next are adding to a growing sense of confusion and frustration.
Mr. Trump unilaterally extended the ceasefire, while until just a couple of hours before he said, I wouldn't extend it, and I'll do this and that. But he did extend it himself. He falsely claimed that the Iranians were in Pakistan and were giving away everything, and that the US will go to Iran and take everything. And then he said, I will extend the ceasefire for the sake of the Pakistani president. It's obvious that he'll eventually take his warships back and nothing will happen. We will win. Rest assured.
Trump is very moody. We shouldn't care about what he says. We should know what we are going to do. Our officials should tell the people what they plan to do.
We should know where we stand. Is it going to be peace or a ceasefire, or is the war going to continue? The way things currently are, one doesn't know what to do.
Well, Nate Swanson is Resident Senior Fellow and Director of the Iran Strategy Project at the Atlantic Council. He was Director of Iran Policy in the Biden administration and stayed on in the Trump administration until the summer of last year. Welcome to DW. Let's start with where we are now, even though the situation changes almost by the minute. Why do you think Donald Trump chose to extend the ceasefire with Iran?
Well, first, thanks for having me. Look, I mean, it's a great question. I think fundamentally you have a situation where both sides want to end the war, but both sides only want to end it on their own terms and believe the other's going to fold first. And so what you have is this stalemate that continues to play out that is in neither side's interest, but will, hopefully get resolved here at some point soon.
OK, a stalemate, though, that follows lots of vulgar and belligerent threats from the United States. So Donald Trump has walked up to the edge of this precipice and chosen not to follow through on his threats. Why do you think that is?
There's nothing really for him to be achieved militarily anymore, right? I mean, I think there was always questionable objectives going into this war on what he was trying to achieve. But if we take him at face value that he was trying to degrade the military, we ran out of targets a long time ago. So, going back into a war is not going to change Iranian calculus. And so I think that's why it's not happening. And look, I don't think Iran wants it either. But now they're basically fighting the same fight at the negotiating table, and neither side is blinking.
What can you tell us about the run-up to public declared negotiations? I'm guessing you've been in the room. You've certainly been advising. Your advice has gone up to presidential level. How does the back channeling work to get to the point where the two sides decide, OK, we will meet? How do they get to that point while both sides are claiming publicly that they're not speaking?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've ever been quite in a situation like this where I think they just so fundamentally misread each other. But look, a couple points. I mean, first is having a mediator in general is just incredibly ineffective. And I think, it is to everyone's detriment. These should be direct talks. The fact that Iran won't let that happen, I think, only hurts both sides. Beyond that, though, I think we're really dealing with, vastly misaligned expectations. So I think Iran thinks this should be a negotiation to, exit the war, to figure out the disposition of the Strait of Hormuz. And President Trump is trying to do something that's like legacy building. And so he wants those things, of course, too. But he also wants a nuclear deal that I'm not sure Iran does. And so, I think right now it's the mediator's job to try to find the middle zone where you can talk and meet, but maybe have, more realistic expectations on both sides about what can be achieved.
Okay, so you have to have talks. Or someone has to decide what they are negotiating about, because at the moment, both sides want to negotiate about different things. I'm intrigued by something you said in the middle of that there. You said that they've both fundamentally misread each other. Why do you say that? Because it looks to the untutored eye as though Iran has read the United States right and Washington has got this terribly, terribly wrong.
Yeah, so I think on the second part, I think you're right. I think Washington has misread Iran, from the beginning, right? There's this expectation that, economic coercion and, political or military power would force Iran to capitulate. And that just hasn't happened. And that was really in the run-up to in the negotiations in the run-up to the war, and then during the war itself, and now, right? So that's been a fundamental misread that the U.S. has had of Iran for the entirety of the Trump administration. And maybe long before that. Look, where I think Iran has misread the U.S. is I think they are expecting the president to fold, and continually, and just to exit this war. And so he hasn't done that. And I think that I think they thought this war was over when he announced the ceasefire, 2 weeks ago, and that they were going to enter talks on their own terms. And I think they came into the first round of Islamabad talks overly confident, maybe overly confident in their position and what they could get out of it. And that probably was a misread of the Trump administration as well, right? Because there is a real political element to this for him. And he's got to be able to, from his own perspective, sell this war domestically. And so, I think that they just misread him a little bit there. But I do agree with your premise that this is fundamentally, and more importantly, a misread from the U.S. side of Iran.
Okay, so Donald Trump threatens war and hellfire on Iran. Iran holds a fast. There's a ceasefire. Talks happen. The second set of talks doesn't happen. Donald Trump extends the ceasefire. Now what?
Hopefully, reason and rationale will win out. It is in
Let's
both
discount
sides' interest
that,
to
because
end
that's
this.
not what we've seen so far.
All right, fair. Look, I mean, you need to figure out Pakistan's got to figure out what's it going to take to get them there. And I think there just has to be a realistic expectation about what both can achieve. And so I think that is fairly simple in some ways, right? It's figuring out the Strait of Hormuz and figuring out the minimum Iran can talk about on the nuclear program coherently. And so bridging that gap is the key, but I don't know how long it's going to take. And you're right, reason and rationale has not won out for weeks at a time now. But they both kind of want the same thing, so they just need to actually just figure it out. And I think the best step to do that is just actually get in the room and then start seeing what's possible. Because the assumptions about how Iran and the U.S. will operate so far of each other has been wrong. So they just need to get in the room together.
Help us understand how and why the U.S. stance towards Iran evolved from Trump 1, Biden, and now to Trump 2, an actual shooting war. Just bullet point that for us.
No problem. Yeah. No, I think this is actually really important, right? And so I think the reason we are in this war primarily is because I think the president had been told for years, throughout his first term and beyond, that he can't do stuff, and then he would do it and he had no consequences. The Soleimani strike in his first term, the June war the 12-day war last June, and fundamentally even moving the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Every single time he's told by critics that if you do this, there's going to be these huge repercussions. That never happened. So I think he entered this war knowing, or I think his advisors knew the risks were high, but he just believed he was right. And so there was just this extreme confidence that led him to believe that you can do this. And that was a big shift from Trump 1, which was actually not always, but at many times quite cautious. There was a incident in, I believe, 2018, where they shot down one of our drones, and Trump was ready to go attack Iran. And then he pulled it off at the last minute, not wanting to have this war. So I think the fundamental shift for Trump himself is just this extreme confidence in himself that exists now that didn't exist before. Look, from the Biden team, I mean, we entered 2021 expecting to get back into the JCPOA. Didn't happen for a variety of reasons. A lot of it having to do with Iran's own positions. But there was on our end, there was this expectation that the situation wasn't great with Iran, but you could manage it, and we could avoid the situation we've had now. And I think that was possible, but ultimately it was but it's Trump's extreme confidence in himself. And then also, this is kind of the fall-on aftermath of the October 7th attack of Hamas on Israel that also kind of put us on this track as well.
Okay. And across that period of 3 presidencies was the assumption that Iran continued its uranium enrichment, which caused Israel to become increasingly agitated about the possibility of a nuclear-armed neighbor.
To me, it's less about the nuclear program and it's more about Hamas, the Hamas attack in 2023. I think at that point you saw a shift in Israeli rhetoric and I think strategy where no longer were they willing to accept threats and not believe the leaders. So you saw them say this about Hamas and Hezbollah, never again will we not believe they'll do this. And so given the military successes they had against Hamas and Hezbollah, they thought they could do the same for Israel. So for Iran. So I think they're prepared to do the Iran attack in June 2025 without the U.S., but the fact that we were willing to join was just, a huge benefit to them. And I think it's helped contribute to this moment. But still, at the end of the day, it's Trump's willingness and eagerness to do this war with the belief there was no consequences, which was obviously wrong.
Okay, let's end with 2 questions in one. The biggest mistake you think the Trump team is making now, and if you were still advising the White House, what would your next briefing say?
Yeah, the biggest mistake in my mind is clear. It's the idea that pressure will force Iran to capitulate. I mean, it's just been wrong throughout the entirety of this second term.
And you think that the White House thinking has not changed on that?
It's hard to say that definitively. I mean, look, the offer that was on the table in Geneva and the offer that's reportedly right before the war and the offer now are different, right? There is an acknowledgement, a tacit acknowledgement about Iran's right to enrich. There's more details about what the U.S. would be willing to concede, which weren't there, 7 weeks ago. So there has been some tactical shift. But strategically, I still think the bottom line exists that the pressure is the key to getting what you want in Iran. I don't think that's necessarily right. And so my advice for that would be to be just much more pragmatic and to be much more simple in what we're trying to achieve here. And if you do that, then you can do small, transactional deals with Iran. But the idea that we can transform Iran, who they are, regime change, all that stuff, I just don't think is possible in the short term. And so that's fundamentally what my advice would be. Transactional, not transformational.
Good talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Nate Swanson from the Atlantic Council.
Thank you very much.